everybody, we got a great one today, for a change. And this time I finally mean it, finally. Molly Jong-Fast joins me, and we're going to talk about her great new book, How to Lose Your Mother, which will be premiering as a New York Times bestseller. You all know Molly, but you might not know that her mother is writer Erica Jong, who became famous for her 1973 novel Fear of Flying, a groundbreaking book of feminist literature that sold more than 20 million copies. It's about a woman whose marriage has lost all passion and fantasizes about having passionate sex with a total stranger with no strings attached, what Erica Jong called a zipless fuck. Oh, I'm sorry. If you're listening in the car with your kids, I apologize. Before we go to Molly, I just want to say a few words about the harrowing events in Minnesota. The murders of Melissa Hortman and her husband, Mark, and the attempted murders of John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette, are deeply disturbing and heartbreaking. Melissa was not a close friend of mine, but we campaigned together throughout the state, and I got to know her. Melissa was a warm person with a ready laugh, but she was a tough negotiator and a very effective leader who always fought hard for Minnesotans. Melissa, of course, had been the Speaker of the Minnesota State House, and she led her caucus brilliantly. Together, they passed legislation that made meaningful progress on a host of issues important to the people of the state. In 2023 alone, the legislature passed a guaranteed right to reproductive freedom and a bill that will lead Minnesota to 100% clean energy by 2040. They made college free for low-income Minnesotans and guaranteed free breakfast and free lunch for all K through 12 students. And all were signed into law by Governor Tim Walz. This is a tremendous loss for Minnesota and for Melissa's colleagues, for her and Mark's friends, and for their son and daughter. The world lost two wonderful people and a great leader. May their memory be a blessing to all who knew them. There are two GoFundMes, one for the Hoffmans and one for the Hortman family. You can find the links to both in the description of this episode. Okay, we have a great one for you today. Molly Jong-Fast is with me, and it is a great one, for a change. Well, normally we talk politics and what's happening in the world, and we're going to do that maybe at the end, but I love your book, How to Lose Your Mother, and congratulations on being in the... What were you, number 8 in the New York Times?
I think I was number 6 on the combined list, but then I fell off this week. So I'm trying to emotionally. They had to print more, and it was sold out at a lot of places. So this is a good thing, but, I can seize defeat from the jaws of victory.
Well, you don't have to mention that it was actually fell off the list, do we?
Okay. No, it's a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah. So let's talk about the book. And interrupt me during this anytime you like, okay?
Okay. I'd love to interrupt. Don't worry.
Good. 2023 was an epically horrible year for you. Your mother, Erica Jong, who's the mother in the book, had become famous from her 1973 novel, Fear of Flying, which sold more than 20 million copies. And she was diagnosed with dementia, as was her husband, your stepfather. You had 3 kids who needed you. You had a very busy career. Your husband was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
Mm-hmm. Neuroendocrine cancer on the pancreas, but yes.
Oh, what is it called?
It's called neuroendocrine cancer, and it came up in the pancreas, but it is, it's not quite the same, but it's still...
It's not quite the same as pancreatic.
Yeah.
And thank God for that, right?
Yes.
Okay. And he's okay.
Yes.
Okay. But it was pretty tense there.
Yeah.
And your stepfather and your father-in-law died.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your stepfather had been diagnosed with dementia as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he had Parkinsonian's dementia.
I see. That's right. So this was exhausting for you. And so as it's happening, you decide to write a book.
Yes.
You couldn't have known how horrible the year was going to be. When did you start writing the book?
So let me go back in time a little bit. So I had a platform. And so people came to me and said, you should write a book. But because I come from books, I think of books as not like a lot of people who write political stuff write books that are sort of disposable, books that could have been a magazine article or books that are no longer in date a couple years later or a couple weeks later, depending. And so I wanted to write a book that was like a real book about something. And
That's a good idea.
And when my mom started getting dementia, I thought, this is so weird because she's disappearing and and I never got the chance to have the relationship with her I wanted. And then as that was happening, the whole thing, as I was selling the book, my husband was in an emergency room where they found the pancreas thing. And so even though I had a chapter of the book, I started writing it and worse and worse things started happening to me. But I did towards the end of the year think to myself, maybe I'm the thing, because everything terrible kept happening to people around me. And I was like, maybe it's me.
Well, it wasn't you.
No, it's a completely crazy thing to think. But I did have a moment where I thought, could it be me? Could I be the reason this keeps happening? But it's not.
Let's talk about The Fear of Flying. It was considered a groundbreaking work of second wave feminist literature. What does that mean, the second wave feminist literature?
So actually, I was interviewed by this literary agent called Jennifer Rudolph Walsh, and she had quite a good explainer for it, which I hadn't heard, which was, so this was a book that sold 27 million copies. And if you think about books today, like Michelle Obama's book sold 4 million copies. Mm-hmm. So it was a huge number of copies. And part of that was because at the time, they didn't have phones. They didn't have anything to do. People had to read a book. They had television, but they didn't have VHS. But also because, 1964, the pill came. That was like a seminal moment. Sure. 1973, Roe v. Wade is decided. So it was a moment in American life when women were, for the first time, really getting to be whole people. The other thing I would say, which I think is really important, is my mom, and this was part of why she was so conflicted, I think, she was born in 1942. So 1942, women couldn't have checking accounts. We forget how
is that
recent.
Right? That's right.
Yeah, not until either, the 60s could women have checking accounts without their husbands. It was such a completely different. This is less than 100 years ago, women were not considered to be full people. So I do think that what we see is this is so new.
But she's
right?
born in 42. So yeah, she's 52. In 1952, she's 10.
Right. But I'm just saying, no, but she grew up in a world that didn't exist, pretty quickly. And so I do think it was quite hard for her, if that makes sense.
So a recurring theme of the book is your mother's addiction to fame. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
So I found, and I saw this is not unique to her because my grandfather also had a problem with this.
Howard Fast.
Yeah, Howard Fast, who wrote Spartacus.
Young Fast. Yeah, he wrote Spartacus.
Yeah, and April Morning, and won the Stalin Peace
80
Prize.
Books or something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 80 books. And he won the Stalin Peace Prize the last year that Stalin gave it out. So Stalin was like, I'm awarding you a prize. Think about that for a minute.
And he had it displayed?
So it was for a while on a mantle. with sort of caveats. He did eventually disavow Stalin, but he was very late to it. So I read, it's funny, I read this.
What year is that? What year does he win the Stalin Peace Prize?
I think I should look it up. Let me see.
Sometime in the 40s?
Let me see what year.
Well, we don't have to know.
No, we have to know. 1953.
1953. Okay, that is late.
Yes. Not great. Not great. It's in the Cold War Radio Museum. So anyway, so the point of this story is, so my father found it in his basement in Palm Springs. He picked it up. He was like, oh, shit. And then he dropped it, and we can't find it now. But I do remember seeing it as a young, and it was like a coin. But now that I've seen so many people have won it, I'm now a little less impressed with it.
Okay. Well, anyway, the recurring theme of the book is fame.
You want me to answer the actual question?
You can, if you like. But is her addiction to fame?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
So both my mother and my grandfather were famous, and then they were less famous, and then they weren't famous, and then they were famous. I think it was very hard for my mother to, I believe that fame is the closest thing we have to magic in modern life. It changes the way you treat people. It changes the way people treat you. You can get restaurant reservations. You can, it's magic. Right? A little bit. It also makes you often a terrible, terrible person. Though not always, but sometimes.
But in a way, your mother.
Well, she wasn't terrible exactly. I think what happened to my mom was she was an alcoholic. She writes this book. She becomes as famous as a famous comedian, right? She's on television. She's on night shows. She's pretty famous. And then she can't ever put the genie back in the bottle, right? She can't ever be like, well, I got famous and now I have this nice house and I can afford my life, so let's just enjoy it. Instead, she becomes sort of obsessed with getting back there, and she can't ever get back there, and so it's an object of misery. And my grandfather was somewhat the same, though he had other books that sold well.
Let's talk about how your mother's addiction to fame affected you. I'm going to read a few of your quotes from the book.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Mom clearly understood that fame was, even for most famous people, a temporary state. She was indeed always concerned that someone might try and take her career away. The problem was she was pretty sure it was me who might take her career away.
Yeah. So, do you want an explanation of that?
Yeah, sure.
My grandmother was a painter, and she was the best friend of a woman called Lee Krasner, who was the wife of a very famous painter, right? Called Jackson Pollock. So wow. Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner were married. Lee Krasner painted, not as famous, but got actually a little bit famous because she was married to Jackson Pollock and she painted pretty well. My grandmother was always shocked that she wasn't Lee Krasner. And she blamed her daughters because that they had prevented her from becoming a famous painter. This was my whole theory of the case. And so my mother was always a little bit scared that I was going to take away her fame. And I think that was because my grandmother transmitted that to her.
So which grandmother was she? She's your...
mother's mother.
I see. Okay. So that's
that she felt
thing.
She was a failure and wanted to be a success. And she felt that parenting had made her a failure.
So she was a terrible mom, your mom, basically.
Not my mom, but my grandmother was. I mean, my mom was complicated.
Your mom was pretty terrible. She couldn't spend an hour a day with you. She had a tough time doing that.
Boring. But my my grandmother was really a bad mother. I think my grandmother was a much worse mother than my mother was.
Here, I'll quote you again. My mother had been a negligent parent, and it was impossible for her to be otherwise. She was a damaged person. She wasn't a bad person. She tried her best. And it was true that sometimes your best is actually not good at all. Sometimes your best is terrible.
Yeah, it's not a great mother, but
Well, I'm just quoting you.
Yeah. No, not the best.
So you go up and down with her. I mean, a little. She at times she was not all that bad.
Yeah. She's good. She's bad. I don't know. I feel much better about her now that I wrote this book.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I feel like much less mad at her. So go figure.
But the mad at her is in the book.
Yeah.
Sometimes you traveled with her.
Yeah.
You're right. You started to go to Venice as a child because your mother had a lover there.
Yes. What was his name?
An Italian guy who was married to
a countess.
To a countess, a German countess.
Yes. He was the people, oh God. But I don't know that the wife cared so much than my mom. I think the wife was like a little impressed that he was having an affair with Erica Jong. In Italy, it's a very different kind of thing, It's funny because it's like, I really had a terrible time we would stay in this like palazzo that was really rotting in this weird neighborhood that wasn't near anything. And none of the rooms had air conditioning. And it was like 1,000 degrees and everything smelled of sewage. Cause like Venice is both very glamorous and also quite disgusting. And they have these black flies in the summer when it gets really, really hot. And still, I'm very grateful that it made me it made me kind of who I am, and I'm grateful for that. I love those black flies.
Of your nanny, Margaret, you write, Margaret was my mother. Well, not really,
Ish.
But sort of. She was more of a mother than my own mother was. That was for sure.
Yeah, I think that's right. It was funny because one of my cousins, who's like now very involved in politics and very lefty, once said all this stuff about how terrible she was, and it netted down to that she was like, it was like clearly classism. Like I was listening to him and I was thinking like, this isn't really her being terrible. This is you being a classist.
Who was he saying it was terrible?
Margaret.
Really?
Yeah, he was saying, well, she's the reason that you're fat is because she's fat and she hasn't taught you that being fat is bad. It was like
most people who see you on TV say she's not fat. So
no,
you're
when
fat
I was
as a
young.
Girl.
Yeah. And it was like this insane dialogue. I mean, we never write about class, which is like this last bastion of just a weird signifier, which is so interesting. But yeah, I really liked Margaret and she took really good care of me. And I was really lucky to have her.
Here, I'm going to quote you again. I never went to a wedding or to a bar mitzvah or to a party or anything with my mother in which she didn't get drunk. Then grab a microphone and give a toast.
Every fucking time. It was like, what is the opposite of Toastmasters? That. Did you even know? I didn't know until I was an adult that they asked people to give toasts. I just assumed if you were a famous alcoholic, you could get up there and give a toast.
Well, I think that most people feel like they can, if they're not called on, that they can toast, that especially if they admire the person who's being toasted. To tell the one about this guy, Ken
Follett. Yeah, the Ken Follett story.
Yeah.
So what would happen is my mom would get like the alcoholism, she'd sort of control it for a while, and then something terrible would happen and everyone would do an intervention. And then she'd control it for a while, and then something terrible would happen, and they do an intervention. So this, right? So we'd be like, every 6 months, and all right. So she has this party at her house, and she gets real drunk, and I'm like, no. At this point, I'm maybe 37. I'm like, no, I'm going in the other room. Like, I've been to this rodeo before. I know how this ends. Mm-hmm. And so my husband explains it to me because he can't get out. But it is literally her being like, she had this long time friendship with Ken and Barbara Follett. Barbara was a member of parliament, a liberal member of parliament, really wonderful. Ken, incredibly successful and brilliant writer. The things she says, like, everyone is gap-jawed. It's like, well, we never fucked. And it's this room filled with middle-aged people looking at each other in horror. And it's like the most drunken, embarrassing thing ever. And then the next day, Ken and Barbara come back and we try to do an intervention on her, which lasts for 6 months.
I think it broke at a Seder. You described in the book.
A Seder?
Seder, well, yeah. Where she, now she's been on the wagon for several months. Yeah. And she insists still on having wine in her glass. Yeah. And there's a thing where you dip your finger in and then taste it. And she does that, and then she just downs it.
Yeah, so my husband, when we first met, he was like, I don't really think your mom's an alcoholic. She's famous. She's very successful. She's clearly not an alcoholic. And I was like, okay, well, I'll see you back here in 5 years. And so he is sitting next to her and she's dipping her finger in, and then she's licking her finger. And then all of a sudden she's tilted the glass and is pouring it into her mouth. And my husband comes to me and he's like, she's drinking again, Mo. I can't believe she's drinking again. And I'm like, it's what they do, man. That's what alcoholics do.
And you're an alcoholic too.
Yes.
You went to Hazelden when you were 19.
November 2nd, 1997. And I've been sober ever since.
Isn't that amazing? That's amazing.
It's both amazing and it's not amazing, right? Like, if you are willing to do what they say, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous it's not so hard, right? It's more of a question of you have to be willing, you have to have some amount of honesty with yourself and other people. And, if you have that, you can do pretty well.
The most harrowing part of the book is when you have your twins, when you deliver your twins. And it was absolutely harrowing.
Yeah.
And you almost died there.
Mm-hmm. I think this is the least good part of the book in a way.
No, it was amazing.
Oh, really?
It was a very scary thing. Obviously, I know didn't die, but you thought you were. You thought you could be anyway, right? That's what was harrowing, was being you in that moment.
So the scariest part of it is that I had, it was like one of these days where you're going in and they say, this should be no problem. We have this one and that one, and we have students scrubbed in. And then all of a sudden, because you're awake, you can hear what they're saying. So I hear the doctor say, there's so much blood. Somebody has to mop up all this blood. I'm slipping.
Jesus.
And I hear another doctor say, we just have to put her out because this is not going well. And I am like, oh my God, I'm dying. And I can hear it. Like, was so fucked up. And then I ended up getting out of it. I didn't have an infusion. They just let me sort of redo my blood supply myself. I wish to God I had an infusion, because the next 2 weeks I'm white and I was like, I looked like I was going to die, and I was just so tired. And then I got out of there and I had so many other problems from the surgery because it was so long. Like, the scar didn't heal, it opened. I mean, it was just like a disaster. The point of that story is that pregnancy and childbirth can be very dangerous.
And you must have been at a really good hospital.
Mount Sinai, with two really good surgeons.
So you can imagine why maternal mortality is high in certain populations.
100%. And I tell that story because It was like one of the worst things that ever happened to me. And then my mom made me a character in the book and had me lying about it, which got me so mad.
No, wait a minute. In other words, the character in it is exaggerating what happened to her.
Yes.
Now, did you confront your mom about that?
No, because it was totally like you would say to her, I didn't like when you made me a sociopath in your book. And she would say, kill me, shoot arrows through me. All I do is love you. And you would say, so we're not going to be able to have a conversation about this.
So are you a Nepo baby? Is that what they call?
So when you're 46, it's a new category. It's like a Neposaurus, right? You're like old enough so you can no longer be quantified as a baby. Whatever. Sure, I'll take it.
Well, we have a mutual friend who's a Nepo.
Who?
Adult, Marcy Klein.
Oh, I love Marcy Klein.
Yeah. Well, she was the producer on Saturday Night Live, and she got kidnapped when she was 10.
Yeah, I actually write about that in the book.
You say that your mom kind of secretly hoped that you might be kidnapped because it would be fodder.
Yes. Well, also remember, anyone was kidnapped, right? Like in the 80s, that was like a thing people did. I knew people who got kidnapped, and it was like, you had a rich parent, you had a famous parent, you got kidnapped. And we don't, as Donald Trump says, we don't see that so much anymore. It's an old-fashioned word, kidnapping, like groceries.
Well, let's not give anybody ideas.
Yes. But yes, I think she was a little jealous that I never got kidnapped. But, they just weren't as famous as Calvin Klein.
So your mother kind of betrayed you when she wrote that about bleeding to death, almost bleeding to death.
Yes.
So
yes.
She kind of betrayed you there, would
yes.
you say?
Yes.
And now, were you ever worried about betraying your mom by writing this book?
No. And in fact, had she been normal, she would have been thrilled. She would have been thrilled by this book.
Had
demented.
Yeah.
She'd be like New York Times bestseller. She would have been thrilled. So no, you were allowed to do whatever the fuck you wanted. That was not the problem. The problem was more just that I just always felt like you never knew if something was going in the book or not. Like you couldn't really trust your interactions with the person because you knew they were probably going to write about you.
Really?
Yeah, and that's not a great feeling. It's sort of funny. I mean, the thing is, like, if you read The Journalist and the Murderer, or you read any of these books about journalism, the whole job is to sell people out, right? I mean, that's why you exist in a certain way.
How did other people that you write about in the book feel about the book? How does your husband feel about?
Yeah, everybody's fine. I mean, when he got cancer, I was like, what I tried to do was I tried not to injure normal people. So like my aunt was like, Grandpa Howie fucked me up too. And I said, I know.
That's Howard Fast.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I tried not to like go after non-main characters, right? I tried not to get involved with other people's stories. And I think that was a good call. With my husband, when he got cancer, I was like, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to write about this.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it's just too cinematic. I have to write about it. I apologize.
It is very harrowing. At one point, you say that he had a smell.
Yes, that really annoyed him. That was the one thing that got him so crazy. And I was like, but people who are sick often have smells. And he was like, I smelled because I was in the hospital. I was like, why do you care? It's just a detail. And so we still fight about that.
You still fight about that?
Yeah. Well, fight is, I think, a strong word. Yeah. But he'll still be like, so do I smell? And I'll be like, it's a thing that sick people have.
Some things in the book are a little harsher than others. This is about your mom. Her fans got the same Erica Jong I did.
Yes.
There was a no private individual. There was just Erica Jong, feminist icon, except that she was really not that feminist. and really not that iconic.
Yes. That is true. I mean, she was a little iconic. She just wasn't that feminist. My favorite thing about her was that she would give you the worst advice. So you would come to her and you would say, what should I do? And she would say, you should get pregnant before you're married, and then the guy will marry you. She had like the worst, like you'd be like, that seems like terrible advice. I had a cousin who was married to someone and wanted to have a ménage à trois. So they asked my mother.
Mm-hmm.
My mother said,
absolutely.
Of course. Then 6 months later, he's with the girl they had the ménage à trois with. And I was like, what? Who asks Erica Jong for relationship advice? I was like, what are we doing here?
You write that when you first introduced your husband to your mom, you told him that she would be wearing a robe and that she didn't tie it.
I said, you will see this woman naked. I apologize in advance. And in fact, he did see her naked. Look, man, I can't be responsible. I warned him. I said, you're in for this. I apologize. And I said, I have to say another incredibly fascinating detail. Maybe this is not fascinating. I think it is.
Well, let's take a shot.
My kids were like, you probably were baptized. And I was like, I'm Jewish. My parents are both Jewish. I said, no, I wasn't baptized. What are you, crazy? And they said, did you take communion? I said, all the time. And they said, probably your nanny, your baby nurse who was a Baptist took you to get baptized. Why wouldn't you?
Okay, so you are a busy person. You were especially busy then, taking care of everybody.
Yeah.
Did you feel sometimes that you were in the wrong place?
Always. And also, I'm actually not that good a caretaker because I have really bad ADHD. So I'm mostly like, I give you a little time. I sort of I'm good at figuring out the people who can deal with your situation, but I'm not great at like sitting with you at your bedside for 6 hours. That's like not me.
Yeah, you couldn't really stand being at the most expensive nursing home in the world.
I liked Sloan Kettering because
that's the hospital.
Yeah, that's the cancer hospital because I felt like it was very clean, right? And I don't like it. I get very freaked out. Like I've had so much surgery at Mount Sinai and it's just the dirtiest. Like it's amazing that everyone doesn't die. I mean, it's so dirty. Like when you're in there, you're like, this is so dirty. But it's a good hospital with great doctors. But I really, 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 I have trouble sort of sitting still. I think that's a real problem for me. And so that's why I do so much stuff.
So between taking care of kids and all of this stuff, you were very busy, and you're still busy now with your career.
I'm trying. I'm just every day I'm just doing my gigs in the gig economy.
So you write for Vanity Fair.
Yeah.
And you have the podcasts, which you do how
4
many
times a week?
4 times a week.
400 times. So I do a podcast Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And I do it because there are very few podcasts that drop on Monday or Saturday because most people don't want to work on the weekends. So, I mean, that's really what it is. So we do really well with our Saturday and Monday podcast because there's just not a lot of competition.
Ours drops on Sunday. This will drop on Sunday.
Sunday, right. Sunday's a good one too. I like doing it. I actually find it pretty fun. And I really hate writing. Like I hate writing the way writers hate writing. Mm-hmm. So, and also writing can sometimes take me like 5 hours of writing can take me 2 days. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Because like you can just not write and then you can be like, oh my God, I've sat at my desk for 3 hours and I've not written. So podcasts are fun.
I know that one.
Yeah. Podcasts are fun because it's like, I like to talk to people. I'm an only child who like was very lonely. So when I get to talk to people, it's great. And then I spent so much time trying to get adults to do stuff for me when I was a kid. Like not even great stuff, like just normal stuff that I'm very good at manipulating people. So that works really well for podcasting. Sorry.
And I think the people know you most from MSNBC.
Yeah.
How does that work? I'm very curious about that. If you're contributing to that, how staffed are those shows in terms of you're getting research and help with that stuff?
They don't give you, sometimes they'll give you pieces to read. What I try to do is so the podcast really helps with going on television, believe it or not, because I talk to a lot of, so I have Leader Jeffries on my podcast, or I have you on my podcast, or I have different electeds on my podcast. So I can say, I just talked to da da da, and he said da da da. Because I talk to a lot of people, I just know a lot of stuff that's happening. And that's very helpful. And then I try to read all the reporting I can in the Washington Post, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and The Atlantic, and anything else I can read. And then I listen to these two really boring podcasts. One is I like better than the other, that are like industry podcasts.
Their industry, what industry is that?
It is like politics industry, like, the kind of the podcasts that lobbyists listen to, I listen to. And then I try to talk to people. But, why I like being on television is not because I have such great opinions, because I actually, even though I'm an opinion journalist, I'm on the opinion side, I don't think my opinions are actually what's useful about my punditry. I think what I do best is make connections. So I could make a connection between a Supreme Court decision and something else, or this and that, that I can put things together in a way that makes them make sense to people. And that I think is much more useful than my opinion. That's why I try not to get involved in primaries.
Because?
Unless it seems like there's a huge miscarriage of justice happening, I try not to get involved, because either I'm not read in enough, or my opinion, even though I'm on the opinion side, isn't necessarily as informed as it needs to be.
Well, let's talk about some of the stuff that's happening right now. What interests you in particular?
I mean, the thing that is getting me the most furious, if you want opinion, is I'm super agitated about the lack of legislation and the lack of oversight from Congress and the Senate. That is what's getting me agitated. The BBB, which is this big, beautiful bullshit bill that will cut Medicaid and cut Medicare.
And they're trying to cut it more now, just to make it cheaper.
And by the way, it still grows the deficit.
Huge, because of the tax cuts.
Right. It's an amazing piece of legislation that both grows the deficit and fucks over poor people and cuts SNAP. And I mean, it's just a terrible fucking disaster bill that Mike Johnson cooked up in about 10 minutes and passed in the dead of night, and which many Republican senators now say they wouldn't sign had they read it.
You mean House members wouldn't vote
House
for
members,
it.
Right. Marjorie Taylor Greene, you'll remember, said, I didn't know it had this, you can't regulate AI, for 10 years at the state level, right? It's a rejection of federalism, this bill. And then there's another thing in it that says the judiciary can't, whatever, it limits the power of the judiciary. I mean, these are stuff, by the way, that the Senate parliamentarian is going to knock right out of there anyway. It's just so bad. And that is the stuff that gets me very agitated, because I know that there is it's just terrible. It's a terrible bill, and it's going to hurt a lot of people. So I hate that. That's my opinion.
But Trump called it the big, beautiful bill, right?
Yes. Trump, look, it is the purest distillation of MAGA as a policy. It cuts taxes for rich people. It has this tax cut on tips. No tax on tips, which is it's like such a Trumpy thing because, okay, so he goes on the road. He says no tax on tips. So then he says, we're going to do no tax on tips. Okay, what's a tip? Is my book advance a tip? Maybe that's a tip. Is what the hedge fund manager makes on the carried interest, is that a tip? Because maybe that's a tip. I mean, it's just a completely Trumpy, nonsensical thing to do.
Well, I think most people know what tips are for waiters and for maids and in hotels. And
how many of these people report tips anyway?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. If you're in a restaurant and people put the tip on the bill,
maybe. But I mean, it's a completely crazy way to do business. I mean, I just think it's just a terrible piece of legislation, which is going to get through and doesn't need to get through. And Democrats should be able to stop. But the thing is, Republicans are just so incredibly, impressively craven that I don't know that happens.
There was a Supreme Court decision this week where they upheld bans on transgender care for minors.
Yeah.
You see that?
Yep.
And they decided 6-3
yep.
to allow this law, which allows states to ban that.
Yep.
Now, to me, this is, I would have been with the 3. I think you would have been with the 3, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And basically, this prevents kids who are approaching puberty from using puberty blockers and hormones.
Yeah.
Which I think is a crime.
I mean, it is, again, like, do these people really give a fuck, or do they think this is good for them politically? And I think they think it's good for them politically. And that's why we're here.
Well, Supreme Court justices shouldn't care what's good for them politically.
Right. But we know they do.
Well, I guess that's true.
I mean, if you've seen Scalia and Thomas, like, these guys just watch Fox News all day long.
Well, not Scalia anymore.
Right. Sorry, Thomas and Alito. Scalia is watching Fox News in the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm from Minnesota, and my listeners will have heard my monologue about Melissa Hortman and the horrible assassination. And I know I shared with you when I was on your podcast how great Melissa was.
Yeah.
And Mike Lee's tweet.
Yeah.
This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way. This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way. How appalling was that?
I think it's pretty appalling. What I think was interesting about it was he's clearly trying to do this Trumpy thing of having it both ways, right?
Well, I think he's trying to say that she was killed from someone who's a Marxist.
On the left.
Yeah, on the left.
He's trying
if they're Marxists today.
Right. And he's trying to, and that's what Trump said too, right? Trump also made sort of an overture that perhaps this was, not a Trump voter, which of course it was, yes. Who had a list of Democrats he wanted to kill. But maybe this is, but look, what I was actually, believe it or not, what was interesting about the Mike Lee thing was he didn't get away with it. That's like the first time, he deleted the tweets. Tina Smith was like, took him aside. We don't know what she said, but it seemed like she was pretty
Saw
mad.
the photo, yeah.
Yeah. And there was just a lot of weirdly, and look, he didn't apologize because he's MAGA, and why would he? Though he does represent Utah, a state filled with very religious people.
Mm-hmm.
So that is kind of odd. But I actually was glad. I thought people actually did weirdly hold him accountable, which, as you and I both know, is unusual.
I think part of it came from what Ed Shelley wrote, who was my former deputy chief of staff and now is Senator Smith's.
Yeah.
So let's talk about one last thing, Iran.
Yes.
Should we get involved in this?
No. The one thing I liked about Trump, and I don't like really anything about Trump, is
that he wants to avoid us getting in the war.
Involved in war. By the way, can I just say Netanyahu's been saying we got to bomb Iran for there was a compilation. He's been saying it since he got in office 20 million years ago. I mean, I think that bombing Iran is a terrible idea. I think that it never goes well for us. We can't even handle our
being
own
involved
regime.
in a war in that region is never good for us.
It's never good for us. And there's always some stupid reason to go in there, and it's always a fucking disaster. So the idea that now we're going to go in because Netanyahu, who has created this terrible situation in Gaza where all these people are starving,
awful.
is now going to bomb. This is insane. There's zero reason to do this. And the worst part about this whole story is that it makes me agree with Tucker Carlson. I'm sorry, but literally the worst.
Does Cruz want to go in?
I mean, Cruz wants to go in because of the Bible. And again, we are in no way endorsing Tucker Carlson by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But Tucker goes, what part of the Bible?
Mm-hmm.
And Ted Cruz doesn't have an answer. So he goes, the scripture. And he goes, what part of the scripture? And he says, well, I don't know exactly. And then Tucker goes, you want to bomb Iran, but you don't know because of the Bible, but you don't know what part? Again, I do not want to say anything nice about Tucker, but that was some pretty good interviewing.
Well, this has been great.
Thank you.
I hope to see the book back on the list.
Me too.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.